Guest today is the famous Raymond Hardin. Most of you will know from singing in the King's Chapel Choir. Here's Ed Bice. Wow, let's get him in here too. So Ray sang the choir for many, many years, and he is our first speaker in sort of a sub-series that I've been thinking we should have all along, that I sort of called Talk About Music I Love. So I think about once a month, I'm going to ask somebody to just talk about some music that they absolutely love and tell us why. And that sort of whole kind of topic. And Ray is our guinea pig for that. And he's going to talk to us about spirituals. He had many candidates of various pieces of music that he loves. And this is what he's settled on. So Ray, give us all a little bit of a background about your history and your life with spirituals. Take it away.
Well, I welcome my fellow Arkansan Ed Bice. It's funny that in my early musical experience, my older brother, all of my brothers and I were tenors, and we all did a lot of singing of different kinds. And Ed's father and my older brother sang together at the Episcopal Cathedral in Little Rock. And that's how we may have even met early back then, but we met here in Carol's backyard and become friends since then. Hi, Judith. I see you're working busily in the background there. Hey. So my earliest memories of music are living in the town of Pangburn, Arkansas, population 600, yes. My mother was the piano teacher, and my dad was the volunteer choir director at the small Baptist church, and my brother and I were the local kids, practically. And my first brush with spirituals came sometime later. Gospel, which has been attributed as an offshoot of spirituals, was my first recollection of this type of music. Gospel on the radio in Arkansas was not hard to find. And so that was my first orientation to that, if you will, that type of music, that spirit. And it wasn't until several years later that I heard my first spirituals, probably from the choir when I was in grade school. And then later in junior high and high school, we moved to a larger city, Little Rock, and the choir there actually sang spirituals. Some of them, some really good, Elijah Rock and Go Down Moses and Deep River and so forth. And it didn't really strike me at the time why we were singing these. I just knew that I liked them. I liked the lyricism, I liked the rhythm, I liked the text in some cases. To compound the irony, this was during a time that Little Rock was experiencing well-publicized integration problems in the 50s. So we lived in a neighborhood where there were Blacks living just a few doors away. It was a mixed neighborhood. And I walked past the federal troops at Little Rock Central High School every day. And I don't want to get too far afield here, but that was the context in which I began encountering this music. And it seemed mysterious to me that we would be singing this music. And in fact, some people just couldn't get enough of it. But we wouldn't let Blacks come to our church, and we didn't want them in our high schools and so forth. So I developed there was a sort of mystique about, well, what is special about this music? I knew that I liked it because of the rhythms, because it was fun to sing. We could clap our hands, we could move, we could swing. And for Baptists, that was the best thing, closest we could come to dancing. And so it made its impact on me physically, viscerally. And then as I got into college, we did a lot of, our touring choir sang a lot of gospel arrangements, which were pretty sophisticated at that point. Just out of curiosity, I went on Wikipedia and looked up some of the not so much the origins, that's pretty obvious, but how we came to have what we have now, because after the Emancipation Proclamation, a lot of Blacks, former slaves, sort of distanced themselves from this whole tradition just to move on. And it was the Fisk University in Tennessee had a group called the Jubilee Singers, Black singers, and they were encountering, this was in the 1870s, 80s, they were encountering financial problems. They needed to do some fundraising. So they sent the Jubilee Singers on the road, including going to Europe and singing for royalty, singing these spirituals and giving them a much broader audience and higher profile. And then there were actually some white people in, let's see, I'm looking at some notes here. There was a guy named William Allen who published in 1867 Slave Songs of the US. And it was based on a collection, Army Life in a Black Regiment. A white Union soldier had listened to the black soldiers singing in the campfires and tried to write down what it was they were singing, because it was illegal for blacks to be educated, much less to learn music. And so few of these key people, white people, cared enough to write this down and see that it got disseminated. And that's largely how we came to have what we have. There's probably a lot that's been lost. But I think for me, my first attraction to it was fun to sing. It was rhythmical. It was different from any other music experience I had. I've been studying classical piano, and I had choral experiences throughout high school, and but nothing really related to this so directly. Yeah, I'm purposely doing this without a safety net. I did not make an outline or anything, but anyway, I guess it was a while. I don't know at what point these different layers came about, but at some point I began noticing more of the texts. Of course, a lot of them are biblical, like Elijah Rock and Go Tell It on the Mountain and Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. The imagery in those is all based on biblical stories and tales. And the theme, I guess, throughout all of this is, of course, deliverance, freedom, deliverance, escaping from oppression. And of course, that has translated into so many things during the civil rights movement, gay rights, all these different movements, people yearning for freedom of expression, freedom of who they are, and which is pretty important. And so the result is just something that I have never quite fully understood. I just knew that I liked this on so many levels. And I thought about going into texts, but that would get it'd be like going down a rabbit hole. But some of the things like feeling like a motherless child, well, that's a pretty good description of someone who's been uprooted from their entire civilization, brought to a strange country, and made to labor their entire life with no freedom to do anything. And then, so the imagery that they use, they identify with people who were oppressed, the Israelites, Jesus, anyone who was oppressed or not allowed to be who they were. And I think that's perhaps the single most important message for me personally as a gay man, that I wanted to, we want to be who we are and not be told what's acceptable. And I realize that I'm rambling at this point, but this is what I'm feeling.
Right. Well, I will interrupt your ramble with a couple of thoughts and questions.
Okay.
Maybe elaborate a little more. I've always kind of, because I've, spent a fair amount of time thinking about, exactly what you brought up. What is it about spirituals that seems so universally appealing to many of us, right? And I think it's exactly what you said, right? That there are some sort of very universal, basic for all of humanity things in there. There are themes of hope and longing and redemption. So something that everybody can identify with. And often most of these songs just really grab you viscerally. I was actually thinking yesterday when I was musing about what we're going to talk about that somebody should devise a Facebook quiz and say, what's your favorite spiritual and what can we learn? What can we tell you about your personality,
Yeah.
about which of these songs you love the most? And I think that's what all of us have encountered. And similar to your story, Ray, when I was in high school in Denmark, we sang Go Down Moses and all of these songs. It's sort of interesting, right? Because I think that was a part of, this was, in the 1980s, and there was this very sort of, I don't know, you probably couldn't call it woke because I don't think anybody was woke yet, but I think it was part of an effort to make us kids aware of world cultures. And I don't know that there was any thought of it being specifically, African American culture, but I think on the part of this was typically music teachers that would have you sing, sometimes choral arrangements, but just like everybody singing together in unison, just learning these songs. So, I knew a lot of them well before I ever came to this country.
In fact,
so
I was going to mention later in my comments how surprised I was that you knew so much about not only American music in general, but about spirituals in particular, and that added to my love of singing at King Chapel. Because you do such a variety of music, and since I love such a variety of music, it felt like a really good fit. And the fact that for instance, one year we even did a cantata based on spirituals. The woman from Arizona came in.
Judith Cloud.
Yeah. And that was a wonderful experience because it kind of made a whole event out of this one form. And I think just the fact that it is so powerful in its expression. And when we do, every year for the Martin Luther King weekend, we do a focus on the spirituals. And it seems to be so well received, so universally appreciated, that says a lot about its content, its appeal. It has affected so many lives on so many levels for so long.
Yeah, and I also think, as a sort of an extension of doing some of that repertoire, it also made me then, subsequently learn more about the Harlem Renaissance and sort of all those poets, especially in the 20th century, that kind of have elaborated on, it's very much in the tradition of the spirituals. A lot of their poetry and their writings sort of seem like an extension and taking that tradition further, as you could certainly also say about a lot of these choral arrangements, because and I find that fascinating, what you were saying earlier about it being music of a certain vintage. And when you think about it, there isn't really a whole lot of other repertoire of that particular age that has survived in such a sustained manner and where people keep on writing new arrangements. Is almost to the point that each generation kind of has a preeminent spiritual, that there are arrangers that really work specifically in that genre and have kept on doing it, and here we are, you going on 150 years later from, as you said, that sort of repertoire was first kind of codified, or whatever you want to call it. Somebody started writing them down and sort of consciously working on arrangements and these various schools of thought within all of that.
Carol.
I just wanted to say that theme for me, that's even more universal than everything besides just, oppressed, is just human misery and sorrow and desperation. I mean, that's really exquisitely portrayed in the spirituals. And so in times of deep sorrow, those are the songs that I hear out of nowhere in my head. I will hear choirs singing spirituals.
And along that line, I think it's remarkable that I think virtually anyone spiritual that you think about, there is no anger, sarcasm, cynicism, anything like that. They all are hopeful and optimistic about the ultimate deliverance, freedom that their goal. And so it's, to my thinking, it's completely, I wouldn't say untainted, but I mean, it's not, there's nothing negative about them. They all have a positivity and an ebullience and an optimism that's really infectious. And I think that's maybe part of the appeal, the universal appeal. So many people can relate to that, regardless of what their own issues are or their own life situation is. I mean, talk about people being out of their comfort zone. When they performed this, they had no concept of a comfort zone. They've been ripped entirely out of their culture and not allowed, they had to adapt. They even had to adapt to a faith that wasn't theirs. They had Christianity imposed on them. And actually, there was one comment somebody made, talk about making lemonade out of lemons. I mean, they were given this faith and they made it theirs, and they identified with Moses and Elijah and Jesus and all these characters, and it spoke to them and became the manna, the food or whatever for their strength to keep striving for deliverance. So I think that's
this great element. Sorry to interrupt. There's this great element of the Bible, you know, Sunday school or whatever you want to call it. There are so many, you know, of the biblical tales that, you know, somebody mentions, you know, Daniel in the lion's den or whatever story it is, Jonah in the belly of the whale, and immediately get that association from the spiritual. That's often for me is one of the first things I think about with any gift.
Well, I thought of the song from Porgy and Bess, It Ain't Necessarily So. You know, that they cover a lot of the stories in that one.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Commentary in the next step removed. I wanted to mention Greg has this tradition every year for MLK. He hauls out his CD from an organization he worked for in Chicago, and he always plays this. Greg, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Sure. Well, I'm from Chicago, and I had worked for an orchestra called the Chicago Sinfonietta that was founded, I think, in 1986, 87 by a Black conductor who had been the associate conductor of the Dallas, Atlanta, and Detroit symphonies. And he started this orchestra in Chicago after there was a lot of uproar. Why is there not more representation of Black musicians in symphony orchestras? So he said, I'm going to start an orchestra where the repertoire, the board, the staff, the musicians will represent the wonderful mosaic, a cultural and ethnic mosaic of the city of Chicago. And he did. And every year, every 2 years, he did a tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King. And that was very close to Paul Freeman, the conductor, because his brother was the mentor, one of the debate coach of Martin Luther King. So he used to tell us stories about his brother teaching Martin Luther King and how the spiritual was Martin Luther King's favorite music. And so every 2 years, there would be a concert, Martin Luther King tribute with a specific theme. And one year, it was when I was marketing director, there was a concert where they had the choir from, I think it was the Apostolic Church of Chicago. They're really a terrific gospel choir. There was a rabbi from one of the most prominent, not rabbi, there was a cantor from a very prominent temple in Chicago. And also, I think there was another Black singer, I can't remember her name at the time, but spirituals were the element of that. They talked a lot about how spirituals were part of, the Jewish community, right? I mean, we know about the stories from the Old Testament and how those stories from the Old Testament were used in spirituals a lot. And so this whole group sang all of this together, holding hands, singing spirituals. And it was just a beautiful, and this was an orchestra hall in Chicago. So we had about 2,000 people, whites, Blacks, Jews, Christians, holding hands. And that spiritual was the key to uniting this group together. And it was really beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's really a big part of this, that this music is able to, it seems, there's tends to be a big Boston City Singers, or one of those groups has a big MLK thing at Symphony Hall typically in January, right? It just really seems to have the power to connect cultures through music in a way that's not so easily to sort of come by otherwise. All right, questions, comments? Walter.
There, can you hear me? Can you hear me or not? Okay. Ray, you started out by mentioning that many spirituals or gospel pieces were connected with biblical events. And I just started to make a list of ones I remembered that had a biblical connection. I came up with 8 titles. Ezekiel saw the people. Go tell it on the mountain. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. Go down Moses. Roll Jordan roll. Elijah rock. There is a bomb in Gilead. And I didn't finish the last one. One more where I can't read my own writing. Just my 2 cents worth. All connected with the Bible.
Yep. Pretty good source material.
Could I just ask you a question?
Oh, yeah?
We are climbing Jacob's ladder.
Or Jacob's ladder.
Yeah. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. That was the one I couldn't remember.
Sylvia, you were saying?
Well, do you know the one, Oh, What a Beautiful City?
Yes, that's another one.
Yeah, Oh, What a Beautiful City. And you know,
Yep.
I'm not sure I know the background of 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Yep.
What is that 12 gates? Does anyone know? Is that biblical? It must be.
May I mention something? I think, Walter, you need to mute yourself. We're getting feedback from you. So if you're not talking, we ask that you mute yourself, because I could not hear Sylvia's question. Sylvia, could you ask it again?
Oh, one of my favorite spirituals is Oh, What a Beautiful City. And then it goes on to say 12 gates to the city, hallelujah. And I wondered what the background of that is. It must be biblical, but I don't know the reference. And I wondered if anyone else does.
I actually don't think I've ever heard that particular spiritual. That's interesting.
Oh,
Me
oh
neither.
Ray, I have to teach it to you. It is the best, most joyous triumph of the human spirit. May not even really be a spiritual, but I think it is. I think it is one. I learned it from my friend Maureen, who's one of my dear friends, and she made a whole study of spirituals. It's her heritage.
Well, that's one of the interesting aspects of what we were talking about, that this sort of, subsequent generations of spiritual arrangers, sometimes they write them themselves. And if they do it well enough, they come across as, you can't quite tell, is this an authentic, old-timey spiritual? Is this somebody's, kind of contemporary take?
Right.
Or sometimes they just, adapt a previous, sometimes updating language or just sort of making it into a more contemporary flair, right?
Along that line, Deep River was actually composed as an art song. It was not a spiritual. And let's see, I'm looking at my notes here. Harry Burleigh, who's well known as a spiritual ranger, he composed it as an art song based on his experiences with the spirituals. And it has become among the most appealing of that genre. Another source, Anthony Dvorak, Czech composer, came to the U.S. The end of the 19th century. He was president of the National Conservatory for a while. He made some appearances in Boston, and I think he wasn't that well received. I think even people at my alma mater, NEC, thought he was too radical, that he was saying that the most interesting and appealing music he had found on this side of the Atlantic was from the Black community and the Native Americans, the originality, the human appeal of it. And he thought our approach to music was too Eurocentric. And that didn't sit well in Boston, so he was not given a great reception here. I think he was maybe in some other places. Like he spent some time in Iowa, I believe, and was very popular in that area. But the movement from the New World Symphony, Going Home, is an attempt at sort of classicalizing a spiritual, the Largo from that symphony, based with the, I don't know if you know the spiritual Going Home. That was one of my first recollections. My dad had the sheet music to Going Home. And of course, along with that, I also was taught, anybody ever heard of the song Kentucky Babe? It was not a spiritual, it was a popular song. And it's in Black dialect, Skeeters and Muhammad on the honeysuckle vine.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, and my older brother and I were when we had company, we were trotted out and told to sing that as a duet. And we just thought it was fun, And then at one point, I actually found a recording of the Lennon sisters from the Lawrence Welk Show singing it. And I almost threw up. It was so prettified and so cleaned up. They didn't use the Black jargon that would make it racist. I won't even repeat the words, but those were the conflicting early exposure for me. Going Home and Kentucky Babe, two completely different approaches to recognizing Black culture. And I guess what it comes down to really is that we have done a lot of cultural appropriation here. We have benefited greatly from this form that is only now really being given full credit for what it is. This is something, as long as it makes money, we're fine with it. So take it on tour, trot it out. Some of the finer examples of the spiritual, I have heard Leontine Price in person sing spirituals. The people like Marian Anderson. As a matter of fact, I just learned this the other day. Florence Price is a Black composer who's recently come into vogue. She's from Arkansas also. She also attended New England Conservatory, and she was one of the first Black women to be performed by a major symphony orchestra. Turns out that the famous recital that Marian Anderson did at the Lincoln Memorial featured a song by Florence Price. So I thought that was a really nice tie-in. But these people, and Paul Robeson.
Oh, Robeson, yeah.
And Roland Hayes, who actually ended up in the Boston area. In fact, I sang his daughter, whose name is Afrika, A-F-R-I-K-A. I sang with her for several years at Trinity Church. And Roland Hayes was one of the few Black singers to become internationally famous. He toured Europe. He did a lot of very important stuff. And he sang, a lot of Schubert and so forth, but he popularized the Black music in Europe and everywhere. And so those are, I don't know if anyone remembers Robert Honeysucker.
Oh.
Robert was a wonderful baritone. He was from Memphis, right across the river from Arkansas. And we got to be good friends when we sang in Sarah Caldwell's opera chorus several years ago. And he was one of the most beautiful voices I've ever heard. Every time Robert opened his mouth, you just wanted to stop and take it in, because it was like coming from the voice of God. And I remember at his memorial service, it was quite an outpouring of love for this man who had done so much for music in general, but he knew how to sing a spiritual.
You
He knew
certainly did. Do you remember he sang at Donald Teeter's memorial service?
Yes, I do. In fact, I went up and spoke to him afterwards after that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was very moving, certainly.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions for Ray?
I hope this works. Ray, I never heard Robert Honeysucker sing a word that was not totally understandable.
Yes. Very, very. No, yeah. He was a fine musician and he was just he's a great guy. Really great guy.
Here he is. Well, here we are. Betty has a question.
Yes.
Oh, that's pretty.
I think
Yes,
you're muted,
unmute, Betty.
Gotta
Unmute.
mute
Betty.
yourself.
Mute yourself.
Betty, unmute.
She's muted. She doesn't hear.
She doesn't hear me, but she can hear. She just can't be heard.
No,
There you are.
yeah,
Oh, here.
no, I don't want to hold everyone up, but just to say that I enjoyed the discussion and agree with, like, I think what Ray said, that he was so happy that Heinrich, was well versed in this world of spirituals. And I too had that reaction, when I first heard the spirituals played by KC during the MLK. I think you have a particular year you focus on that. And I loved Ray's discussion about Dvorak and the other Leontine Price and Marianne Anderson. And yes, I have heard Robert Honeysucker sing in the past. And I'm so impressed, Ray, all of your esteemed associations. And I had no idea you sang with the Sarah Caldwell's opera productions. I used to enjoy those.
That was an experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Ray.
to
Thank
see
you, everybody.
and hope to
Thank
see
you, Ray.
That generated some discussion. That was my point. All right.
you. Wonderful day, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
Ray. Thank you,
Bye.
Heinrich.
Ciao.
Ciao.